It's fair to say that strategy is amorphous, fuzzy, vague, abstract, really hard to wrap your arms around. But it definitely makes our recruiting and hiring better. It allows us to see a bigger picture. It allows us to position our company in a way that makes the most of the resources we have available. Moving from a world of tactics and transactions into something more strategic is not easy. Everybody already knows what hiring looks like. They have that sense of, well, you start by writing up the job posting, you publish it, you promote it, you wait for people to apply, and then you pick a winner. Moving to a new model requires a new vocabulary. It requires new thinking. It requires new ways of looking at challenges. This kind of change in mindset is complex. Companies make this leap in different directions, towards different goals, and run into different obstacles. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't take the leap. So in this, the third episode of The Brand Plan, Marcus and I select our 8 biggest challenges, misconceptions, pitfalls, and sticking points that we've seen as we've helped companies evolve and think better about their talent acquisition strategies. Hey, Marcus.
Hey, James, how you doing?
I'm good. So today we're going to talk about, we spent the last 2 episodes talking about strategy and going super deep, and I've heard the phone ring, so that may or may not be Oxford and or Harvard calling to say that they're granting us honorary doctorates on the subject. But today we're going to start to break down, like, strategy is this big idea, and we actually have to do 2 whole episodes on it. What we're going to do today is start to pull apart. What I'm thinking about is there are the pieces or the approaches to strategy, the ideas that you need to wrestle with to make sure your strategy works. How does that fit for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are a number of sort of big themes or ideas that I think anybody would do well to spend a bit of time thinking about. And, hopefully you and I have learned a thing or two along the way. We can share some of what we've learned, of what works and what doesn't work, so that people can start thinking about, okay, how am I going to deal with this? So I'm going to start right at the top with one of the things that I think is pretty fundamental for you to get clear very, very fast. And that is, how am I going to describe what I do? And how am I going to describe what a talent strategy is and why anyone else should care? And to some very different audiences. How do I say that to the HRD? How do I say that to other senior leaders? How do I say that to someone incredibly junior who I just want to come and take part in a focus group or give me a quote for LinkedIn? And I think in particular, how do I describe what I do to marketing in such a way that they're going to go, oh, this is someone worth us collaborating with, not, oh no, this is someone who's going to ruin our hard crafted brand. So I think there's a bunch of people who you need to be able to explain very, very quickly what you do and why it's of value. And I think that's one thing.
Yeah, and I want to highlight this idea that marketing, until you prove yourself, just looks at you like a dilettante, like baby Huey stomping all over, messing stuff up. Ooh, what's that? Ooh, what's that? I'm gonna press that button. I'm gonna make this happen. And they are terrified of
Completely.
of you walking in and saying, hey, what about this? And they've had so many thoughts and conversations about what you just pitched that they don't want to rehash it. And they're trying not to be seen as a dilettante is a big one.
Absolutely. They feel the same way that you would feel if finance turned up and said, hey, we've rewritten the careers homepage. You'd go, okay, that's not your area of expertise. That's my first call out. How about yourself? Give us one in return.
I'm actually going to skip my first one because I think there's one that kind of ties into what you just said. And to me, it's this idea that the industry, talent acquisition, the HR industry as a whole has been sold this idea that an EVP is an employer brand, that it is a one-to-one relationship. Oh, you have an employer brand? Let's see your EVP. You have an EVP? You must have an employer brand. And those things are related by blood, sort of, but they are not the same thing. They're so totally different. But everybody has been, magazines and blogs and podcasts, I guess, have sold this idea. You got to have an EVP, and this is what an EVP is. And once you have an EVP, your employer brand problems are solved magically.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's not helped by the fact that all the experts in this area have completely different definitions. And it's not very helpful that every single agency, every single consultant has a slightly different idea of what an EVP is and what an employer brand is and what a tagline is and what a manifesto might be. And then there's the bigger stuff that sits around it as well, like values, behaviors, employee experience. I think we could spend a whole episode just agreeing what we reckon those things are, because if you're not clear on that, no one else will be. and that's a real danger when you get into conversations with the rest of the business if you can't be quite clear about what those things are and indeed what they aren't. If you want to start an argument in a room full of employer brand consultants, just wander in and go, so EVP, is that employer value proposition or employee value proposition? And then run away, and they will be arguing 3 hours later.
Yeah. It's a verbal grenade. You just toss it into a room and walk out. Yeah. Smart. All right. What is your second big idea, big bullet point, big thing to wrestle with?
Which one shall I go for? I'm going to go with a big one that's very close to my heart because of my background, which is data. And the fact that we have a lot of people who say, I want to do something very data driven, or you get a lot of people saying, I'm data obsessed, or, you see it in people's LinkedIn bios. And then there's an uncomfortable truth that a lot of the data in our realm is rubbish. It's really rubbish. It's statistically not valid. It's been collected badly. It's been analysed incredibly weirdly. And there's a really important question about what data are you going to use? What data can you buy? What data can you generate internally? What data could you get someone else to make for you? And how much store should you put in it? Because none of it's going to be perfect. And I think we can do a whole episode talking about what do you actually use as your data sources here, bearing in mind that we all live in the real world and have limited budgets and, you can't do the perfect data collection. What do you do with imperfect data? And I think that's a big issue that, again, a lot of suppliers in the industry will try and tell you they've got the perfect data set. They haven't.
To pop everybody's balloon, I'll ask only one simple question. How comfortable and secure are you in your attribution models?
Yeah.
I mean, it is literally the most simple data collection. The last click came from LinkedIn. The last click came from Indeed. The last click came from Who Cares Job Board. The last click was from an email. Do you actually trust your ATS to collect that data and connect that data to the application? Because we've all, and I mean everybody in the sound of my voice, we have all been in those rooms. We start to unpack that report and say, wait a second. If I ask blah, 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 blah job board, they said they sent 12 people over, but we're saying we only saw 2, and the fights begin. Yeah, my rule of thumb is always all data is wrong, but if you're lucky, all data that you're looking at is wrong in the same way consistently over time.
The only danger here, James, is that when we get on to talking about this for real in the main episode, you're going to have to stop me going off on a mathematical thing about Pearson correlation coefficients for like 20 minutes because I have calculated them by hand. I know the formula from which it's carved, and they are more complicated and tricksy than you think they are. And things that look correlated aren't really. And it's always a measure of, is this a fluke result? It's never, is this true or false?
Marcus, were you trained as an engineer, perhaps?
Just a little.
Just a little. Okay.
So what have we got next? What else have we got? So we've got data. What's going to be the next topic after that?
I mean, honestly, data is a great kind of oldie but a goodie. So here's my oldie but a goodie. This is the thing I absolutely cannot believe we are still having conversations about, or more importantly, the thing that when I bring it up, people try to argue with me. This is the saying, the sky is blue, the world is round, pizza is delicious, right? There are certain inherent truths to life. This is just how it is. You have to accept it, or I don't know what you're doing all day. And that is this. Marketing, classic marketing is about quantity. Recruitment marketing, employer brand recruiting is about quality. And I'm going to prove it real quick for the 17th billionth time, but what the heck, we might as well. Here's the deal. If you're selling whether you're selling a jet plane or you're selling a toothbrush, if someone shows up with the cash, you do not ask them, when was the last time you bought a plane? I've got a list of all the times you bought planes. It's been 3 years since you bought a plane. Can you explain the gap in the time you did not buy a plane? If they show up and the check clears, congratulations, you made the sale. In recruiting, you got the one seat. You got to fill it. So you don't fill it, you fill it with the best person.
Exactly. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think possibly one of the biggest mistakes I'd made in my career many, many years ago was making a job ad that was too attractive. And it was for a local government organisation who were legally obliged to reply to every applicant. And it swamped their team for months because we'd done too good an ad and we hadn't asked enough in it. And yeah, it's a completely different. I think I had this kind of, but in a bigger topic of things that we're over impressed about consumer advertising that we should stop copying. And yeah, this is part of it. I think also some of the techniques in consumer advertising that flow from that quantity piece, they just don't work when you bring them over into employer advertising. I feel like sometimes I'm the bad guy on LinkedIn because whenever someone posts that phrase of your candidate is your customer, I've got a really bad habit of replying, no, they aren't. Stop. If you had the same relationship with your customers as you do with your candidates, you would lose all your customers. You know, the customer walks in the door, you don't say, first of all, can you fill out this enormous form for me? No, you don't. Like, you might do that at a later stage. But it's a bit of a nonsense to say, oh, your candidate is your customer or your employee is your customer. No, they aren't. You've got a completely different relationship with them, and you have to do the hard work to think about what that relationship is going to be. You can't just kind of try and steal this model from over there that does something completely different.
Okay, I think you're up for the next topic. What do you got?
I am. Let's say I want to talk about, I think there's this really interesting idea about employer brands and the scale at which they're going to happen and how you're going to federate them through a business. So, to explain what I mean by that is, I have so often worked on projects where there's a global employer brand that was led in one country and now we've got to roll it out in other countries, or vice versa. I get someone on the phone to me saying, head office over in that country over there have come up with a new global employer brand that I have to deal with, but it's all wrong for my market. How do I adapt it? How do I make it work? And I think there's an interesting question about, can your business have one global EVP? Can it have one global brand? If it can, how are you going to manage that and do it in a way that it resonates in different places and with different audiences? And genuinely, the answers are definitely going to be different from business to business.
All right, I think it's my turn. Okay, so this is poorly described, but I think the second I say it, you'll be like, oh yeah. And
Okay.
the worst part is I have like a 40% chance of you just whipping out a term I've not heard and just like, oh yeah, James, we call that this. I'm like, oh God, I look dumb in front of Marcus. This idea that employer brand gets pigeonholed in the pretty picture, pretty words business.
Right.
Hey, fill out the Instagram, make the pretty pictures, make the job postings look better, make the career site look attractive. Oh, I saw this other career site. It's all parallax and it does this funny thing when you scroll and it's super sexy. Do this thing, make it pretty. And I it drives me crazy because, you know, for a very long time, for those of you who remember, the two most important websites in the entire known universe were Amazon and Google. And the two ugliest websites in the entire known universe were Amazon and Google. They weren't pretty, they weren't well written, they were incredibly useful. And every time I think about putting employer brand into that pretty picture, pretty words category, I think, what is it trying to do? What is it trying to achieve? Which goes right back to that strategy idea.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you also have to think through, you know, where are you stopping? You know, is this just to get an application in, or, you know, this should go through into onboarding, this should go through into employee experience, and then it becomes very real and it's really not about pretty pictures. This is now about what actually happens. And okay, if we've promised everyone X in the job ads, how do we remind them when they join that they're getting X? How do we make sure that their line manager knows that they should be getting X? How are we going to put are you getting X into the employee survey? And it's not now about pretty words and pictures or a strap line, or are you going to have giraffes or donkeys in your ads? This is now about how are you going to use this thing to affect the way that you are as an employer and the way that you talk about the way you are as an employer. And that's then a whole bigger can of worms that you are getting into, but it's a really worthwhile one.
You're up next. What you got next?
Okay, I've got a dangerous one next, or a contentious one, which I think is quite a difficult conversation, which is about how much can or should we innovate or experiment in employer branding, and what are the risks and benefits in doing so. And I think there's, you know, the fast way I sometimes explain this to people is, if you were in charge of talent acquisition at a business and I said to you, right, James, I'm going to give you a big shiny red innovation button that you can press. And if you press that button, one of two things is going to happen. 50% chance that your business is going to recruit, every single person you recruit is going to be 10% better. Every single one of them, right? Forevermore. 50% chance the careers website crashes uncontrollably for 3 weeks, right? Are you going to press that button?
The downside is so high on a situation like that that the upside is just dwarfed.
but it kind of isn't, because if you think about it, the upside is massive. Everyone 10% better, the whole workforce. The upside of that is enormous. And the careers website's down for 3 weeks. How the careers website's down for 3 weeks? That used to happen all the time in the early 2000s, and no one cared. But it's because the failure is immediately measurable and obvious and instant, whereas success is much more subtle and success is much harder to prove. And if everyone in your business is 10% better, you can bet everyone's claiming responsibility for that. All the line managers are saying, oh, well, that's because of the amazing way. L&D are going, oh, it's the brilliant way we're onboarding and training people. The chances of you actually getting credit for that are quite low and would take years to prove.
Yeah.
Whereas the risks of failure are very instant and very immediate. And this is always the challenge when it comes to doing something like an employer brand. You go, okay, if a client says to us, right, we want to differentiate ourselves, I go, oh, that's easy to differentiate yourselves. Are you sure you want to? And I've certainly had this conversation before with a law firm who said, how do we differentiate ourselves? And I said, oh, you could do it like this. And I sort of wrote some stuff, and they said, that doesn't sound like a law firm. And I said, no, it doesn't. That's why it'll differentiate you.
I think I got the next one. So I have it written as employer brand as defense instead of offense. And that's a horrible way of terming it, but your reaction made me go, "Oh, good. This made sense, right? This idea that employer brand is how you polish off edges. It's how you respond to negative reviews. It's how you get defensive, how to not be seen as negative, how to kind of whitewash as much as humanly possible to just remove any of the negative connotations, ideas, perceptions around it. That is the purpose of employer brand. And that is like maybe 10%, if it's even that, because to me, every good brand doesn't fit everybody. So therefore, your amazing brand might be amazing to Marcus, but I'm gonna be like, no, that sounds horrible. And that's a win for you. And vice versa, right? It's a win. And to say that it's all about being defensive and not saying, how do we put a stake in the sand and say, this is who we are, this is what we're all about, and we're totally fine if you don't get it, to be meaningfully interesting, meaningfully different and compelling. That is the goal of employer brand.
You can't be everything to everyone. And you shouldn't. And if you try to be, you're setting yourself up to fail. What you can do is figure out who you are, and then decide which bits of that you want to keep and revel in, and which bits that you might go, oh gosh, we need a change program here because we've discovered who we are and we don't like it. Okay, that's a different matter. But you do have to do this kind of analysis of who are the people we want to come and work here, and what might they want, and what have we got to offer them. And that is a much more, back to the earlier bit we had about personas, that's a much more mature way of thinking about your audiences, is what are the mindsets of the people who we want to come and work here, and what have we got to say to them? And there might be more than one. You might go, actually, people who work for us could be this kind of person or could be that kind of person. We can be this kind of employer for that kind of person and this kind of employer for that kind of person. That's fine. But you need to think through that bit rather than simply trying to be the best employer at everything, because you can't be the best employer at everything.